أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فوضوا أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن الناس من يشري نفسه ابتغاء مرضات الله صدق الله العلي العظيم. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman across the globe, Salamun alaikum jamian wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: Who is Ali ibn Abi Talib? Salawatullah wa salamu alayh. Keep the question in the back of your mind, inshallah. When we come to our modern society, when we come to our modern world, we find ourselves in an environment, we find ourselves in a world where the world is starving for justice, a world that's starving for leadership, a world that's starving for guidance. Across the globe, we find a dynamic where you're seeing airs of extremism arise, where logic is not prevailing, whereas you will find an environment where the person who is downtrodden, the lower rungs of society, the lower layers of society are starving and are asking for guidance and are asking for justice to be in place. And at the same time, in parallel to this, we see a world where there is favoritism at times, a world that is not as focused on interest, a world that is more focused on interests as opposed to justice. In that environment, perhaps more than ever, the world needs an example like the personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the cousin of the Holy Prophet, the son-in-law of the Holy Prophet, and as the Holy Prophet himself said, his own very brother, Ali ibn Abi Talib. The commander of the faithful, the Imam of the pious, this individual embodies all of those traits which humanity strives for or should be striving towards. And how does one encapsulate this individual? How does one understand this individual? How does one tie into this personality all that is him? How do you explain who Ali is? How do you do it? That after the Holy Prophet, if there was anyone as exalted, you'd be hard pressed to find that individual. That Ali is that paragon, that anyone who stands at the shore of the ocean, that is Ali ibn Abi Talib, is mesmerized because they find no shore attached to this ocean of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Because you can't find the shores of it. At the same time, you cannot measure the depth of the knowledge, of the insight, of the spirituality of this individual. Don't take my word for it. Take the words of Professor Philip Hitti at Princeton University, professor of Semitic languages at Princeton, one of the renowned institutions of the world. When he looked at the personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib, when this Princeton professor, Professor Hitti, Philip Hitti, at Princeton University, looked at and analyzed the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says he was someone who was valiant in battle. That is, courageous in battle, Ali was. He was valiant in battle, and yet he was wise in counsel. His advice was wise. He was wisdom and wise in his counsel. And yet he was eloquent in his speech. He says at the third level, he said Ali was eloquent in his speech. He was true to his friends, and he was magnanimous to his enemies. Imagine, it's maybe easy to be true to your friends, but to be magnanimous to your enemies, Professor Philip Hitti says, that's something that's unique. You won't find these individuals who take the high road, who are even magnanimous, gracious, amazing at that level to their enemies. That's the level of Ali ibn Abi Talib. That's the personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And he goes further when he's analyzing Ali ibn Abi Talib. And he says the Solomon of the Arab tradition, or the Solomon of Arabic words, who around his personality, words, around his personality, proverbs, around his personality, poems, around his personality, sermons, around his personality, anecdotes, around his personality, Professor Philip Hiddey says, all of these wise sayings emerged around the personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So, what is Professor Philip Hiddey at Princeton University saying with respect to Ali ibn Abi Talib? That he had all of these characteristics of valor in battle, of wisdom in counsel, of eloquence in speech, of being true to his friends, of being magnanimous to his enemies, and beyond that, having all the wisdom of Solomon. Solomon, who in the Bible is considered the wisest of men, the wisest of leaders. And Professor Hiddey continues and says, he became the paragon of both nobility and chivalry. It was as if he was a knight, he was saying, as Gibbon said in another place. This was the personality, this was the being of Ali ibn Abi Talib in the eyes of others, not just Muslims. And further, when you look and you analyze this personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib, when we come to the Islamic tradition, Rasulullah says with respect to Ali ibn Abi Talib and the personality and the being of Ali ibn Abi Talib, Rasulullah says, Ya Ali, he's attributed to have said, Ya Ali, no one will love you except a believer, and no one will hate you except a hypocrite. And that who is a munafiq, the person who is two-faced, the person who is hypocritical, that's the only person that you will find who has hatred in their heart with respect to you. But perhaps one of the most eloquent and most beautiful encapsulations and summaries of the being of Ali ibn Abi Talib comes from the words of Alam al-Hilli in Kashf al-Yaqeen. Alam al-Hilli is not a normal scholar. Alam al-Hilli is not an ordinary scholar by any measure of the term. Rather, he was that person which we're told that even at his young age, society was waiting for him to hit the age of baligh, of bulugh, to hit the age of puberty, so that they could follow him because his knowledge was surmounting his age, was surpassing his age. This individual who solved many problems for the world and society and tashayyu, this person who did much work for tashayyu, he writes in his book Kashful Yaqeen about the merits and the attributes of Ali ibn Abi Talib. This compilation, which I recommend everyone to look at, about the magnanimous traits of Ali ibn Abi Talib, he says, this great mind, Alam al-Hilli, says, I am baffled, I am shocked at the personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib. With respect to what? He's an alim, he's a scholar, he understands the sciences of wisdom from Islam, the Quran, the Ahadith, the prophetic traditions, the sayings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. He's aware of all of these. Yet he is saying that I'm astonished, I'm shocked, I'm baffled. At what? He said Ali ibn Abi Talib is that individual that his enemies, the ones who were opposed to him, the ones who were against him, they sought to hide his merits, they sought to hide his virtues, they sought to hide his grandeur and his magnanimity. This was on the one side, the enemies were trying to hide his virtues. And on the flip side, his lovers, his companions, his close ones, his confidants, his people who were from his descendants, his friends, those people who were close to them, they also hid his virtues. Why? Because they were afraid that the personality of Ali in the eyes would raise at such a level that people would begin to say this is something greater than man. So even his enemies, Al-Mahalli says, his enemies tried to hide his virtues, and his proponents, his friends, his lovers, his people, his companions, they tried to hide his virtues as well, but for very different reasons. One was trying to belittle him, and thus they hid his virtues. The other group, they were afraid that perhaps people would do with Ali ibn Abi Talib what people actually did after Ali ibn Abi Talib, or during his life even. They began to say he was God. Na'udhu billah, hasha lillah. They began to say that they were a fear that perhaps they not do what they was done with Jesus to make him the Son of God, or even God in the form of the Trinity. So therefore his supporters even hid his virtues. And so Allama Hilli continues that despite both parties, those who loved him and those who hated him, trying to keep those merits away from the public eye, still the number of merits and fadail of Ali ibn Abi Talib are innumerable. I'm baffled at this fact. Alam al-Halli says in Kashf al-Yaqeen. How is it possible that someone who the world, the society, friend and foe alike tried to withhold his virtues, and yet till this day his virtues are innumerable? At that point, we are told that the Holy Prophet would hide the virtues of Ali ibn Abi Talib from the public, and to the point that he would say, I am afraid that the people will do to you what they did to Isa ibn Maryam, what they did to Jesus, son of Mary. That Jesus is an exalted prophet. Jesus is one of the highest stature prophets within Islam, but yet he is a servant of God, as he said himself. I'm afraid that people will do to you what they did to Isa. And yet, this personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib is one which every major person tries to tie within Islam, tries to tie themselves to Ali ibn Abi Talib. How? You go to, for example, the Shia community, everyone is trying to hold on and cling on to the shirt of Ali ibn Abi Talib so that they can get their salvation. You go not even within Shia, because some people may say this is an issue for the Shia, the Shayyu, the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. By no means. If you go, for example, to our brothers in Ahl Sunnah, the Sufi category, for example, the sect, the group of Ahl Sunnah who identify as Sunni, of course, they are not Shia, but every single major one of their orders, every Sufi order, with the exception of one, all of them go back to Ali ibn Abi Talib. All of them originate with Ali ibn Abi Talib, except for one. And even that one, the Naqshbandi order, of that, there's three. One of them goes back to Abu Bakr, the rest go to Ali ibn Abi Talib, as they say in the orders. That is why is every mystic, you go around Turkey. I remember I had the opportunity to go to Istanbul some years ago. Every major shop, before the sectarianism emerged, every major shop in Turkey, every major store in Turkey, you will be hard pressed, at least at that time, some years ago, you would be hard pressed to find a single store in Istanbul that did not have a picture of Ali ibn Abi Talib in it in some way or form. Are these people followers of Ahlul Bayt or Shia? Not necessarily. Most of them identify as Ahl Sunnah. In fact, some of them even identify as secularists. They say we don't have a religion. We don't adhere to Islam. As you remember, if you will look at the pages of history, you will find that Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, he had a movement of secularization of the Ottoman Empire of Turkey. And yet, despite all of this, you will find the person who may not be the most religious, he still wants to identify with Ali ibn Abi Talib. What type of personality is this Ali ibn Abi Talib? That he gravitates and he pulls the person who is of deen, of religion, and the person who may not be of religion even closer into his hold. That is the personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib. You and I are so fortunate to have leadership, to have guidance, to try to aspire to be the Shia of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Why? Because there's an old saying from old classical wisdom that don't get too close to a politician. Don't get too close to your role model. Don't get too close to your whoever you aspire and look up to. This was a saying that was said in classical wisdom. Why? They would say if you get close, if you look at the politician who speaks well and tries to do, and you see on the public stage, when you get close to this politician, you may notice that this politician has some shortcomings in their life. That the way you had envisioned them in your mind and the way they are in practical reality, maybe they have hypocrisy, maybe they have deceit, maybe they have some traits that you didn't know they had in them. So your view of them may come down. The same way, an academic or somebody who's an intellectual or whoever your role model is, you take a sports athlete, whoever it may be, that you thought in your mind this person is spectacular on every front. But then when you began to get close to this person, you began to analyze them and look at their life and you realize, hold on a second, this person has this missing, this person has this missing, this person has this missing. And there's a series of different traits that are left to be desired. Honesty, integrity, fairness, morality, ethics, whatever that trait may be, it's missing. You go further. In fact, people have said throughout history, don't get too close to the rabbi, don't get too close to the priest, don't get too close to the imam, from whatever faith you go to, don't get too close to the monk. Why? Because when you personally spend time with that person, you may get further from religion. Why? At times, not all the time. But why? Because that there is a gap between theory and practice. There's a gap between what should be and what is. But subhanallah, how amazing, how magnanimous, how fortunate are we as followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, that our followers, our guides, our leaders, our people who hold the flag of Islam for us, the closer you get to them, the more you understand God and the closer you get to God. The closer you get to their persona, the closer you get to their personality, the closer you get to their being, the more you remember God, the more you understand the grandeur of God. In fact, the amazingness of Ali ibn Abi Talib and his likes, the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, it only gets greater and more elevated the closer you get to them. This is a unique trait because the world asks, why do you follow Ali ibn Abi Talib? Why do you identify as Shia of Ali ibn Abi Talib? Why do you become part and parcel of this individual? The question I ask is, why not? The question I ask is, show me a greater role model. Show me a greater leadership. If there ever was a greater leadership, it was in the personality of Rasul al-A'zam, the Holy Prophet. And Ali ibn Abi Talib himself says that I learned from Rasulullah, Rasul al-A'zam, Rasulullah, and no one else. And we take that on board. But after Rasulullah, there's no greater leadership. Show me. If you show me greater leadership, then perhaps I'd be willing to take this on board. Therefore, in the next few moments that we have together, I want to look at Ali ibn Abi Talib in the first phase of his life, the younger phase of his life, the youth of his life, so that we can try to extract gems from his life so we can implement in our own. And if nothing else, we can instill in our heart and entrench in our hearts the ma'rifah of Ali ibn Abi Talib, or at least a glimpse of the ma'rifah of Ali ibn Abi Talib, so that we can revive ourselves. Because I tell you, my dear brothers and sisters and my friends, that if you want spirituality and you want the kernel of spirituality, the depth of spirituality, and the heart of spirituality, and the nucleus of spirituality, it lies in none other than the persona and the personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the one who spent every single second, every minute, every hour, every day, every week, every year, every moment, every breath of his life in service of his Lord, in service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the height of spirituality. That not a moment passes by where you and I are negligent of the presence of the Almighty in our lives. What was the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib? Beginning number one, his birth in the holy Kaaba, the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala itself, accepted by all Muslims. That the house where Ali ibn Abi Talib was born was the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah Almighty Himself. Number one, as time progressed, from his very onset of his life, from his father and before, the support of this individual, this was with Rasulullah from the very beginning. No, Alam al-Hilli and Kashful Yaqeen says the fada'il and the merits of Ali ibn Abi Talib do not begin and do not start with his birth. No, they start from even before his physical being. They start in the world before this realm. That when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the first nur, the first light was the light of Rasulullah and Ali, and from it split the light of Ali. That the first of creation, Rasulullah split into Ali ibn Abi Talib. They were made from the same nur, they were made from the same light. And merit after merit you will find in the heavens of Ali ibn Abi Talib before his coming to this world. But once he emerged in this world, he was granted with that benefit and that graciousness of being able to support Rasulullah at every moment. It was none other than Ali ibn Abi Talib and his siblings, his brothers, Ja'far, Talib, Aqil, Ali, these individuals who Abu Talib, the uncle of Rasulullah, was swapping from bed to bed in the night to protect Muhammad, to protect Rasulullah. It was Ali who was sacrificing his life from before even he had gotten to the point of the era where he declared his outward Islam, as they say. They call him the first Muslim, Ali ibn Abi Talib. But Ali ibn Abi Talib was Muslim way before there was time. Nonetheless, at that point in time, this was Ali ibn Abi Talib. Furthermore, we're told there's a moment in time where the chieftains of Mecca, they wanted to harm Rasulullah. And they would always try to find ways to hurt Rasulullah, either through words or physically. And so what the chieftains of Arabia, such as Abu Sufyan and Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab had done, what they began to do was they told the children, we want you to take the pebbles and the stones and throw it towards Muhammad. Throw them towards Muhammad. when he passes by. So they began to throw it. When they began to throw it, one day it happened, 2 days it happened, 3 days it happened. When it happened one after the other, we're told that this news reached, and Abu Talib saw this and witnessed this. When Abu Talib saw this and witnessed this, he began to go. He said, I will deal with this, my son, my nephew, Muhammad. Don't worry, I will take care of this matter. We're told Abu Talib gets up and he proceeds towards the chieftains of Mecca. When he proceeds towards the chieftains of Mecca, he begins to speak to them, to the likes of Abu Sufyan, Abu Lahab, Abu Jahl. And he says that my nephew, the son of my brother, he's begun to be, you have pelted him with stones, you have hurt him, you have harmed him. These children, tell them to stop. They're pelting my nephew with stones. At that point in time, we're told that the chieftains began to laugh. They said, who's throwing stones? The young children? He said, yes. At that point in time, they said, it's a children's matter. It's a children's affair. Let it stay amongst the children. And they laughed it off and he went away. Abu Talib wasn't laughing. When Abu Talib went back, he says, they have children in their homes. They have children. I have a child as well. At that point in time, he calls Ali ibn Abi Talib, we're told. He says, Ya Ali, at that moment, a young boy, he says, Ali, every time Muhammad goes from the house, from today, I want you to go with him. At that moment, and when you go with him, if you see children who are harming Rasulullah, throwing stones at him, I want you to deal with them. I want you to stop them. I want you to take care of them. From that moment in time, Amir al-Mu'minin, Ali ibn Abi Talib, as a young boy, whenever Rasulullah would head out for tabligh or just walk in the city, at that moment, Ali ibn Abi Talib would be with him. And when Ali ibn Abi Talib would be with him, at every moment, when the young people began to throw pebbles and stones towards Rasulullah, at that point, Ali ibn Abi Talib would catch them and take them by the hands and twist their hand and remove them and toss them away from Rasulullah to protect the Holy Prophet. We're told when this happened and this ensued, at that moment, these same children who were throwing stones at Rasulullah one day, now they went back to their chieftains. They went back to their chief leaders. They went back to the likes of Abu Sufyan. They went back to the likes of Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl. And when they went back, they said, we've been hurt. So what happened? They said, we went to throw stones at Muhammad today and he was with someone. He said, who was he with? He was with Ali. Son of who? Son of Abu Talib. He says, very well. So the chieftains, they got upset. They went towards Abu Talib. And when they went towards Abu Talib, they began to start a conversation with Abu Talib. Salamu alaykum wa alaykum as-salam. Or whatever their greeting was at the time before Islam for the Jahiliyyah period. They said their greeting. And when they said their greeting at that point in time, they said, we have a complaint, O Abu Talib. So what's the complaint? He said, your nephew, Muhammad, he had with him your son, Ali ibn Abi Talib today. He said, yes, what happened? He says that these children of our families and our tribes, they're complaining because their wrists have been broken. They have been hurt by Ali when they tried to do what? When they tried to do what Abu Talib says, when they tried to throw stones at Muhammad. He said, he began to look at them. He said, Ali did it to those children? He said, yes. Ali is a child? He said, yes. He says, well, it's a children's affair. It's a children's matter. Let it stay amongst the children. At that point in time, the idea was that every moment in time, whether it was Abu Talib or whether it was Ali ibn Abi Talib, from father to son, the protection of Rasulullah was going on consistently through the hands of the Holy Prophet's family and his nephew, his cousin, as well as his uncle, and the whole family. Ali ibn Abi Talib was never negligent of his responsibility of protecting Rasulullah throughout his life. In fact, we're told when Rasulullah announces his prophethood at the age of 40, announces it, not becomes. When he announces it at the age of 40, Ali ibn Abi Talib is 10 years old, we're told, because there was a 30-year gap between the two. And the first to pray with Rasulullah was Ali ibn Abi Talib. Some came later and historians began to say amongst the elders, this was the first. And they began to try to make gender differentiation and age differentiation. The fact of the matter is, the first person to pray with Rasulullah before anyone else was Ali ibn Abi Talib, bar none. And therefore, all of the others who came afterwards. Ali ibn Abi Talib was at the forefront. In fact, not only this, we're told at the moment in time at the famous Da'wat al Ashira, where Rasulullah invites, وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ, when Rasulullah invites the near ones, the near relatives. When he invites them at that point in time, these are the chieftains, the leaders of Makkah, the leaders of Quraysh, when he invites them to eat, they come. And at that point in time, these are people who are used to eating one sheep, one goat themselves, by themselves. And at that point in time, they have one leg of lamb that they have prepared, that Abu Talib has made arrangements through the blessing of Rasulullah for them to have to eat at this gathering, at this festival or this feast, so that they congregate together. When this happens, these chieftains see this leg of meat at Da'watul Ashira, and they look at it and they begin to mock and say that one of us eats this. Or in fact, one of us eats an entire sheep, an entire goat. You've kept one leg of lamb? At that point in time, through the barakah of Rasulullah, Abu Talib says, you eat as much as you can eat, we'll take care of the rest. Don't worry about it. And they also wanted to belie Rasulullah. They also wanted to say that Rasulullah is not honest. So they brought their full appetites. You know that feeling that you get in Shahr Ramadan when you've had a tough day, maybe you've missed suhoor, you've missed the morning meal, and now your fast is feeling doubly more intensive. That feeling. So they brought their appetites. When they came to the table, they began to eat and eat and eat. And they're noticing that the food is not diminishing, the food is not becoming less. And they're eating and eating and eating up until the point in time we're told that they eat all until they are totally filled and the food is still remaining on the table. At that point in time, right when Rasulullah is about to speak, at that moment in time, the chieftains, one of them gets up and he says, now we must go, we must go. And then he takes the whole crowd and takes them away. The next day, the same ensues. They bring their appetites and they want to belie Rasulullah. The food never ends. Their appetites are full. They can't take it anymore. And yet when Rasulullah begins to speak, they get up and leave. The third day, the same happens. At the same time, we're told that Rasulullah makes the statement finally. When he finally makes the statement, at that moment in time, he's asking that whoever accepts this invitation to Islam and whoever supports me in my mission and whoever is supporting me will be my wasi, will be my vicegerent, and will be my viceroy, and will be in the support of my mission, and will be after me in charge of the mission. And no one stood up except Ali ibn Abi Talib at that moment. Then Ali ibn Abi Talib was told by Rasulullah to sit down. Why? Because he is marking history at that moment. He's saying that let's give someone else a chance. So people don't say that, oh, it was just a boy Ali. If there was some more time, somebody else would get up. This was the first level. Second time, Ali stood up. No one stood up. Third time, Ali ibn Abi Talib stood up. At that point, Rasulullah says that Ali surely will be where it is attributed to have said that he has passed on to Ali ibn Abi Talib the vicegerency and made it clear, although Allah had already established this in the heavens, that this to happen. But no one had an excuse at this point in time with respect to Ali ibn Abi Talib. Furthermore, the battle of Badr, where Ali ibn Abi Talib gives his life on the line in the battlefield, as Professor Philip Hitti had said at Princeton University, that Ali, when he's explaining Ali to non-Muslim audiences, he's saying he's valiant in battle, wise in counsel, eloquent in speech, true to friends, magnanimous to enemies. Remember these points. With respect to Badr, Ali ibn Abi Talib is that person who gave every moment in life to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At Badr, we're told, the night before Badr, and Badr happened on the 17th of Ramadan, just a couple of days ago, a couple of nights ago. We're told that on that time, at the night, a respected Sayid just told me about this. It's a beautiful narration which I wanted to share with you. And that is that on the night before the battle, we're told it was a cold night. And the Muslim armies had were out of water. They didn't have water. When they didn't have water, at that point in time, Rasulullah is attributed to have said, who will bring water for us? Who will bring water for the camps? Who will bring water for the Shia, or for the Muslims? At that point in time, no one wanted to go because it was a cold night, it was a dark night, it was a windy night, it was a difficult night. And nonetheless, then the morning was a battle. Nobody ensued. At that time, Ali ibn Abi Talib stood up. When Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen stood up, he got up and he said, Ya Rasulullah, I will get this water for us. At that point in time, he grabbed the water skin which they would put the water in the old times and collect it and distribute it from there, the storage container, if you will. So he grabs the water skin and Ali ibn Abi Talib goes out in the dark night. When Amir al-Mu'mineen goes out in the dark night, as I mentioned, it was a cold night, it was a windy night. When he goes out, he goes towards the water well when he sees it in the distance. And when he proceeds towards the water well and he gets closer to the water well, we're told that he emerges there, and that well, it doesn't have a bucket. Typically a well has a bucket, and you put this bucket down to extract the water and pull it back up, and you put it into your water skin, and then you take it back with you. Well, this well didn't have a bucket. So Ali ibn Abi Talib at that point in time, is what is he to do? We're told that he descends into the bucket, into the well itself without a bucket. He goes down, takes the water skin, and he puts the water into the water skin and he fills it up. When he fills it up, he emerges outside of the well. And when he emerges out of the well, he begins to proceed back towards the Muslim camps. When he begins to proceed back towards the Muslim camp, we're told that a very strong gust of wind, that the clouds gather, and a very strong gust of wind comes in the desert. At that point in time, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he lies onto the ground with the water skin as the wind goes and the gust of the wind goes past. When the gust of the wind passes, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen gets up and he proceeds back towards the camp of the Muslims. When he goes back towards the camps of the Muslims, then again another wind, another gust, sandstorm, if you will, begins to emerge. And when this emerges, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he goes down onto the ground and he lays on the ground with the water skin with him. And the gust of wind, strong gust of wind, passes again. Again, Ali ibn Abi Talib, after the wind passes, the gust passes, the sand passes, the storm passes, he stands up and he proceeds towards the Muslim army. When he proceeds towards the Muslim army again, a third time, a wind comes, a strong gale of wind emerges, and Ali ibn Abi Talib, he goes down towards the ground with the water skin and he puts himself there until the wind passes, until the gust of wind passes, until the storm passes. And then when this happens, he gets up again and he proceeds back towards the Muslim army. And finally, he's able to get there. When this happens, Rasulullah sees his brother, his cousin, his to-be son-in-law. He sees him at this moment, and he says, Ya Ali, he says, what took you so long? Alhamdulillah, you brought the water. It's a blessing. You brought it, all of this. But what took you so long? It took a very long time. Now, Rasulullah knows, but he's giving a message for the audience. He's giving a message for the people and the times. At that point in time, we're told, he said, Ya Rasulullah, I went to the well of water. When I went to the well of water, there was no bucket in the well of water. When I went there down, I had to go get the water myself. When I got the water, I came out of the well and I proceeded back towards the Muslim tents. When I proceeded back towards the Muslim tents, at one moment, such a strong gust of wind emerged. When that gust of wind emerged, I lay on the ground and I lay on the sand so that this wind passes, the gust passes, so that I can emerge again. He said, this happened once, Ya Rasulullah. Then this happened another time, a second time, Ya Rasulullah. Then this happened a third time, Ya Rasulullah. Up until the point that it took me 3 tries and then I finally made it. At that point in time, Rasulullah looked at Amir al-Mu'mineen and he said, Ya Ali, do you know what these gusts of wind were? Do you know what these gales of wind were? Do you know what this strong wind was? He said, Ya Rasulullah, what is it? Of course, he wants the other people to know and realize. He said, these were the armies of the angels coming to your assistance. The first wind that came was that of Jibreel, who came with 1,000 angels to assist you. He said that was the first wind. He said the second wind was Mikael, the brother of Jibreel, the archangel, who came with 1,000 angels to assist us. The third was the wind that came from the angel and the 1,000 angel battalion of Israfil. They all came together. 3,000 angels came to support. In other traditions, over 5,000. The idea being that when you have absolute trust, when you have absolute determination, when you have absolute belief, when you have absolute resolve in God Almighty, Allah sends His assistance. But this was the trust of Ali ibn Abi Talib, who went before anyone had sent anything. In the history of the Battle of Badr, Rasulullah would always try to get to a place where he could solve problems with a pen, where he could solve problems with a treaty, such as Hudaybiyah, for example. But the circumstance in Badr, we're told by historians, had gotten so dire and so difficult at Badr for a number of reasons. One of the reasons was that when the Muslims had control of a portion of the water, one of the Meccans, the chieftains or one of the people from the Meccan army, he began to call out. He said, either I will do one of three things. One, either I will get to the water and drink from the water. He said, either I will destroy the water or drain the water, or three, I will die in the process. One of the three will happen. So he began to emerge towards the water and he crossed the enemy lines. And when he went there, we're told, according to a tradition, that Hamza, the lion of God, was there and he struck him on his leg. Now, when he struck him on his leg at that moment in time, he had the option that perhaps he could still go back and retreat. And if he retreated, then he would go back and then there would be no bloodshed at that point in time. But he had made a word and he was determined. When he was determined, he let his ego get in the way. When he let his ego get in the way, he said, either I will get to the water and drink from the water, either I will damage or destroy the water and drain the water, or I will die in the process. He said, I've been struck, so I cannot, for example, I cannot stop until I get a drink of the water, which will be difficult because I'm injured, or I cannot get to the point of I can damage, well, I will die in this process. So what happened was he went further towards the water source, and then Hamza finished him off. When Hamza finished him off, at that point in time, the Meccans said, we must do something and we must respond. So their egos emerged in this situation. And then the battle and the war ensued. But what I want to state here is, at first there was three on three, one-on-one combat between three individuals. And when there was this one-on-one combat between the leaders of the side of the Muslims and the sides of the Meccans on the other side, at that point in time, you had Banu Hashim on one side and Banu Umayyah on the other. You had the people at that moment who would, this was the start, or at least the metaphorical start or the symbolic start of that animosity that would ensue from the Umayyads to the Hashemites for centuries down the line. And at that moment, but when Ali ibn Abi Talib emerged victorious in one-on-one combat, and after that, narrations say 70 oppositions members were killed. 70 people from the other side were killed at the sword of Muslims. Of that, half of them, roughly 35 of them, were killed by Ali ibn Abi Talib himself. This was the ability of Ali ibn Abi Talib on the battlefield. This was the capability and the strength of Ali ibn Abi Talib on the battlefield. Yet how was this individual in his own personality, in his own being? You know, one of the objections that the people had against Ali ibn Abi Talib after the martyrdom of Rasulullah, one of the things that they said about Ali ibn Abi Talib, about his leadership, they said he's not fit to lead for a few reasons. One reason they said he's not fit to lead is because he is someone who's too young. They said he's too young. He's very young at this point in time. He's in his 30s. He's not somebody who's right to fit. Who's fit to lead. He's not the right person. He was 33 at the time. At that point in time, they said he's too young. The other thing they said was he smiles too much. He has too much of a pleasant demeanor. Are you serious that this is one of the reasons that you come forward to try to reject Ali ibn Abi Talib's leadership? These were irrational claims that people made because they had no legitimate claims to try to belittle Ali ibn Abi Talib. Yet this was the personality of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the magnanimity of Ali ibn Abi Talib, that Professor Philip Hitti said at Princeton University, that he was magnanimous even with his foes, that he would still guide the first three khulafa whenever they needed guidance, because the ummah, the nation, was like a child for Ali ibn Abi Talib. We're told on the night of the 19th of Shahr Ramadan, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he goes towards the house of his daughter Kulthum. When he goes towards the house of Kulthum, we're told that she has some iftar prepared for him. When she has some iftar prepared for Amir al-Mu'mineen, she puts on the table certain foods. She puts on the table very simple and basic milk. She puts 1 cup of milk, we're told. She puts 1 piece of bread, barley bread, and some salt. When she puts these 3 things, we're told, Ayatollah Wahid al-Khurasani says, that Ali ibn Abi Talib said at that moment in time, Ali ibn Abi Talib said to his daughter, he said, my daughter, Kulthum, when have you seen me eat more than 1 item at the table? At that point in time, there was milk, barley bread, and salt. Salt, of course, is not a meal, is not a food, it's just a flavoring, it's a mineral. At that point in time, he said, when have you seen your father eat more than one thing at the dinner table? Milk and barley bread on one table? Have you ever seen this? Allahu Akbar. At that point in time, he said, remove one away. Take one away. One is more than enough. Remove one of them. Kulthum, she had the heart of a daughter. It was her father. She knew her father. At that point in time, she tried to remove the salt. When she tried to remove the salt, Amir al-Mu'mineen stopped her, his daughter. He says, my daughter, don't take away the salt. Leave the salt. Take away the milk. I don't need the milk. It was the daughter's heart. She wanted the milk to be there and she wanted the barley bread because she knows her father doesn't eat much. He doesn't eat anything. At that point in time, when she removed this, the question emerges, why ya Ali? Why ya Amir al-Mu'mineen? No one could blame you for having milk and barley bread. Even if you combine the two, it's such a simple meal. At that point in time, he says, I have a wish. I have a desire. Ayatollah Wahidul Khurasani says, with respect to Amir al-Mu'mineen, I have a wish. He says, what's the wish, Ya Ali? What's your wish? He says, I have a desire. The desire is, I want to meet my Lord, my Creator, in a state where I have an empty stomach, where my stomach is empty. That is my wish and my desire, that I meet my Lord and Creator in a way that I am not on a full stomach. I am on an empty stomach. At that moment in time, they said, Ya Ali, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, why do you eat such a simple meal? He says, I also do not wish that in my entire dominion, they say the area which Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amir al-Mu'mineen, was ruling over at the time of his assassination, at the time of his martyrdom, was almost 50 countries today. From Kufa all the way to Hijaz in modern day Saudi Arabia, to Yamama, which is right outside of Najd, which is in modern day Saudi Arabia, to Yemen, and all the way up to Egypt, and in between all of this area. Ali ibn Abi Talib says, I do not wish that there is a single table for dinner or there is a single table of food in the entire dominion of the Muslim nation, from Kufa to Egypt to Sham to Hijaz to Yamama to Yemen, everywhere in between. I do not wish there is a single table of food that is humbler and simpler than mine. I am the Khalifa of Muslims. I am the Imam of the Muslims. I am the ruler of the Muslims, which means that I must eat the simplest of foods. I must eat the simplest of the necessities of what I need to survive, so that no one can say on Yawm al-Qiyamah that I lived under the rule of Ali ibn Abi Talib and Ali ate lavish meals while I suffered. Ayatollah Wahid al-Khurasani says, this is an Islamic republic. This is a Muslim nation. This is Muslim leadership if the world ever saw it. Ali ibn Abi Talib. At that moment, that fateful moment, Ali ibn Abi Talib rises and he proceeds towards the Masjid al-Kufa, for a final time. When he gets there, when he gets into the masjid, before he even gets there, we're told that the ducks begin to cry and begin to wail, because this is the Imam who is not only the Imam of the people, of the insan, of the ins, he is the Imam of the jinn, he is the Imam of the animals, he is the Imam of the ducks and the birds and the flies and the bees and every single one of Allah's creations. They begin to cry and they begin to wail as if to say, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, don't go towards the masjid. We have a bad feeling about this, perhaps to say. When he gets there to the masjid at that point in time, when Ali ibn Abi Talib gets there, he sees a wretched man who is lying on his stomach. At that moment, Abdul Rahman ibn Muljam, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he tells him, he nudges him, he gives him a light, gentle push. He says, do not sleep like this, for this is verily the way of sleeping like shaitan. At that point in time, Ali ibn Abi Talib goes towards the mihrab to pray. And at that point in time, the adhan is sounded. And when the adhan is sounded, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, all the way down the line, up until the point where the adhan is done. done, the aqama is done. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he gets up and he begins to lead the prayers. He does his takbiratul ihram. He says Allahu Akbar. When he says Allahu Akbar, at that point in time we are told the salat, the prayer begins. When the prayer begins, this wretched Abdul Rahman ibn Muljam, we are told he goes by a pillar. He tries to get closer. The Imam continues his salah. When he continues his salah, he says Allahu Akbar. He goes into ruku. Subhana Rabbi al-Azim wa bihamdih. He gets up. He goes into sujood. Subhana Rabbi al-A'la wa bihamdih. We are told the wretched one gets closer. The Imam is in sujood. And then he proceeds towards Ali ibn Abi Talib. He takes that sword that he drenched in blood for days. He strikes the head of Ali ibn Abi Talib. At that moment, a cry is heard from the heavens. Jibreel calls out, "Tahaddamat wallah arkan al-huda." At that point in time, ala qutil al-amir al-mu'mineen. At that point in time, there's a cry from the heavens, and there is a cry from the mouth of Ali ibn Abi Talib, and that cry is, "Fuzutu wa Rabbil Kaaba." By the Lord of the Kaaba, I have been victorious. I have been successful. It was only the Ali ibn Abi Talib who could say this statement. But I ask, what went over the heart of Kulthum? What went over the heart of Zainab? Because at this moment in time, the people gathered and they surrounded Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen said to Imam al-Hasan, "Finish off the salah. That is the priority." They finished the salah. But we are told there is a moment in time where when they get home, Zainab and Kulthum see their father, and it was their tears that began to flow. But I asked the heart of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, "I cannot see these tears. You are going to cry so much one day." That vision was in front of the eyes of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, "My daughters, don't cry at this moment. Your father is still here." Because the visions of Karbala and Kufa and Sham were perhaps in the eyes of Ali ibn Abi Talib. But I ask Amir al-Mu'mineen as a final question. Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, when you were struck, there was your family, there were your children, there were your daughters. But today, your daughters have their hijab. They are in full covering. Come to Karbala, come to Kufa, come to Sham. There is no permissibility for them even to cry over the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون اللهم لعن قتلة الأمير المؤمنين